Los Angeles International Airport bustled with activity. Travelers hurried through wide corridors, suitcases rolling behind them, while announcements echoed overhead. At Gate 53, boarding was beginning for the non-stop flight to New York. Among the crowd stood Catherine Winters, a woman who exuded success from every pore. Catherine wore a tailored black blazer over a silk blouse, designer jeans, and red-bottomed heels that clicked authoritatively on the polished floor. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, highlighting sharp cheekbones and calculating blue eyes. A diamond tennis bracelet caught the light with every gesture, matching the gleam of her platinum watch. She stood in the first-class line, scrolling through emails on her phone with manicured fingers, occasionally glancing up to ensure everyone noticed her priority status. "Just closed the Henderson acquisition," she said loudly into her phone, not bothering to lower her voice. 15 million. They didn't know what hit them. She laughed, a sound that contained no real warmth. "I'll be in New York by dinner. We'll celebrate at Le Bernardin, my treat." The gate agent called for first-class boarding. Catherine promptly ended her call without saying goodbye and stepped forward, extending her boarding pass without looking. At the agent's face, "Good afternoon, Ms. Winters. Enjoy your flight," the young woman said with a professional smile. Catherine didn't respond. She simply took her boarding pass and strode down the jet bridge, her carry-on trailing behind her, a luxury brand known for its understated logo and unmistakable price tag. Upon entering the aircraft, Catherine was greeted by a flight attendant, whose smile remained fixed, despite Catherine's lack of acknowledgement. She located her seat, 1A window exactly as she preferred, and efficiently stowed her designer bag in the overhead compartment before settling into the spacious leather seat. As other first-class passengers boarded, Catherine removed her laptop and began typing rapidly, her face set in concentration. The messages she fired off to her team were curt, demanding updates and expressing dissatisfaction with various reports. Each time someone passed by her seat, she shifted slightly, as if to protect her space from intrusion. "Excuse me," came a deep voice. "I believe I'm in 1B. Catherine glanced up, her eyes immediately registering disapproval. A man stood in the aisle, tall, dressed in a simple grey hoodie, worn jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He carried a well-used leather messenger bag over one shoulder. Nothing about him suggested he belonged in first class. "You sure?" she asked, making no effort to hide her skepticism. "This is first class." The man simply nodded, his expression calm beneath the shadow of his cap. "Yes, I'm aware." Catherine sighed dramatically and shifted her laptop to make the minimal amount of space necessary for him to pass. As he settled into the seat beside her, she caught a whiff of subtle cologne, unexpectedly refined given his casual appearance. The flight attendant approached. "Can I offer either of you a pre-departure beverage, perhaps champagne?" "Absolutely," Catherine said, closing her laptop. "Dom Perignon, if you have it." "And for you, sir?" the attendant asked, turning to the man. "In 1B. "Just water, thank you," he replied, his voice measured and deep. Catherine couldn't suppress a small, derisive chuckle. "Water? In first class?" she murmured, just loud enough for both the man and the flight attendant to hear. The flight attendant's smile tightened almost imperceptibly before she moved away to fetch their drinks. The man beside Catherine said nothing, simply opening a book he'd pulled from his bag. "What a waste," Catherine said, this time directly to him. "You might as well be flying coach if you're not going to enjoy the perks." The man looked up from his book, his eyes meeting hers briefly. There was something in that gaze, a quiet dignity that momentarily gave Catherine pause, but she quickly dismissed it. "I find there are many ways to enjoy a flight," he replied, simply, then returned to his reading. Catherine felt a flash of irritation at being so easily dismissed. Who did this man think he was? She was Catherine Winters, CEO of Winters Tech Solutions, responsible for revolutionizing user interface design across 3 continents. Her net worth made headlines in business magazines. She was accustomed to being the most important person in any room she entered. The flight attendant returned, placing a flute of champagne before Catherine and a bottle of water for the man. As the final boarding announcements were made, Catherine sipped her champagne and observed her seatmate from the corner of her eye. Despite his casual attire, there was something about the way he held himself, a self-assured calmness that seemed at odds with his appearance. The safety demonstration began, and Catherine returned to her emails, ignoring the instructions being delivered. The man beside her, however, closed his book and gave the demonstration his full attention, a courtesy that Catherine found puzzling. Once the demonstration concluded and the plane began to taxi, Catherine decided to establish her dominance in the conversation. "So, what takes you to New York?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was doing him a favor by initiating conversation. "Work," he replied, not elaborating further. "What kind of work?" she pressed, irritated by his brevity. "Film," he said, opening his book again in a clear signal that he wasn't interested in continuing the conversation. "Oh," Catherine said, her voice dripping with condescension. "An aspiring actor, I suppose, or perhaps a cameraman." She gestured at his casual clothing as if it confirmed her assessment. The man looked at her again, his expression unreadable beneath the cap. "Something like that," he replied, then returned to his book. Catherine felt a surge of satisfaction. Just as she'd thought, nobody important. Probably someone who'd scraped together miles for an upgrade or benefited from a company policy. Not a real first-class traveler like herself. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Catherine leaned back in her seat, pleased with having established the hierarchy between them. She had no idea that in just a few hours, this encounter would not only humble her completely, but potentially change the trajectory of her life. Little did Catherine know that the quiet man next to her, the one she had so quickly dismissed, was Denzel Washington. What would unfold during this flight would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about success, respect, and what truly matters in life. But for now, as the plane lifted into the clouds above Los Angeles, Catherine remained secure in her bubble of self-importance, unaware of how quickly it was about to burst. The seatbelt sign dinged off as the plane reached its cruising altitude. Catherine immediately reclined her seat and reopened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. She was preparing for a major presentation to the board of Next Gen Technologies, a potential client worth millions. Every few minutes, she glanced at her seatmate, who remained absorbed in his book. "Flight attendant," Catherine called, not bothering to use the call button. When a woman in a crisp uniform appeared, Catherine didn't look up from her screen. "I'll need the Wi-Fi password and another champagne." "Of course, ma'am," the attendant replied, maintaining her professional demeanor. "The Wi-Fi details are in your welcome package. I'll bring your champagne right away." Catherine rummaged through the pocket in front of her, finally locating the information. As she connected her laptop, her phone rang. She answered without hesitation, her voice shifting into what she considered her power tone. Catherine Winters. Speaking. "Yes, Richard, I'm on my way to New York now." She paused, aware that her voice carried. "The Henderson deal is locked in. 15 million, just as we projected. I told you they'd fold once I applied some pressure." The man beside her turned a page in his book, seemingly oblivious to her conversation. This somehow irritated Catherine even more. "Listen, I need you to set up a dinner with Blackstone's people tomorrow." "No, not the junior partners. I want Williams himself." Another pause. "I don't care if he's busy. Tell him Catherine Winters doesn't fly to New York for middle management." She ended the call just as the flight attendant returned with her champagne. "Thank you," she said distractedly, already dialing another number. For the next 30 minutes, Catherine made 4 more calls, each one deliberately highlighting her importance. She mentioned her recent feature in Forbes, the private jet she usually flew, under maintenance today, unfortunately, and her penthouse overlooking Central Park. All the while, her seatmate remained quietly engaged with his book, occasionally making notes in the margins with a simple ballpoint pen. Catherine finished her second glass of champagne and finally ended her calls. The man beside her had set aside his book and was now reading through what appeared to be a script, making occasional marks with a red pen. The title page was partially visible, "Remembrance of Light." "Working on a screenplay?" Catherine asked, unable to contain her curiosity and the opportunity to exert her perceived superiority. He looked up, his expression neutral. "Just reviewing one." "Anything I might have heard of?" she asked with a slight smirk. "It's still in development," he replied. "I have quite a few contacts in Hollywood," Catherine said, seizing the opportunity. "My firm handles digital marketing for 3 major studios. In fact, I just had lunch with Sierra Montgomery last week. She's the head of—" "I know who she is," he interjected quietly. Catherine bristled at the interruption but continued. "Well, if you're trying to get your foot in the door, I could put in a word. It's all about who you know in that business." The man studied her for a moment. "That's kind of you to offer. How long have you been working with the studios?" 5 years, Catherine said, warming to her subject. "We revolutionized their digital engagement strategy. Before us, they were practically in the Stone Age. Now they can't make a move without consulting us first." The flight attendant approached again. "We'll be serving lunch shortly. Would either of you care for another drink?" "I'll switch to the Cabernet," Catherine said. "The 2016, if you have it." "Water is still fine for me," the man replied. Once the attendant left, Catherine turned back to him. "You really should try the wine. It's one of the few perks that make these commercial flights tolerable." "I'm sure it's excellent," he said. "I just prefer water when I'm working." "What kind of work do you do exactly?" "In film," Catherine pressed. "A bit of everything," he replied vaguely. "Acting, producing, some directing lately." Catherine nodded, dismissively. "Trying to be a triple threat, huh? That's ambitious for an independent filmmaker." She emphasized the word independent as if it were synonymous with unsuccessful. "You have to start somewhere," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "True," Catherine agreed condescendingly, "though in my experience, it's better to excel at one thing than be mediocre at many." A flash of something, perhaps recognition, crossed the man's face, but he simply nodded and returned to his script. Lunch was served on real china with metal cutlery. Catherine inspected her grilled salmon critically before taking a bite. "Not bad for airplane food," she commented, "though after flying private for so long, it's hard to adjust to these mass-produced meals." The man beside her ate quietly, focused on his script rather than her commentary. Catherine, uncomfortable with his lack of engagement, tried again. "So seen any good movies lately?" He set down his fork and considered the question. "A few. I thought Sovereign Heart was quite powerful," Catherine scoffed. "Really? I found it pretentious and overlong. Critics love those artsy films, but regular audiences can't stand them." "What didn't you like about it?" he asked, seeming genuinely curious. "The pacing was glacial, the dialogue felt forced, and frankly, Denzel Washington has done better work. It felt like he was phoning it in." She took a sip of wine, pleased with her incisive critique. "Don't get me wrong, he used to be incredible, but lately, I think he's coasting on his reputation." The man set his script down carefully. "That's an interesting perspective." "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Catherine continued, warming to her subject. "These older actors need to recognize when it's time to step aside for new talent. The industry evolves. You can't rest on past accomplishments forever." A passing flight attendant nearly stumbled, casting a wide-eyed glance at their seats before hurrying past. Another passenger across the aisle looked up sharply, his mouth slightly open. Catherine, oblivious to these reactions, continued her critique. "Take that scene where he confronts his son. Completely overacted. In my professional opinion, he's lost the subtlety that made him great." "Your professional opinion," the man repeated slowly. "Well, I've worked with enough Hollywood types to know quality when I see it," Catherine replied confidently. The man removed his cap to run a hand over his closely cropped hair, then replaced it. "I appreciate the honest feedback. It's valuable to hear different perspectives." Something about his voice had changed, a deeper resonance that nagged at Catherine's memory. She looked at him more closely, but his features remained partially obscured by the cap. The flight attendant returned to collect their trays. "How was everything, Mr. Washington?" she asked, her voice slightly louder than necessary. Catherine's glass of wine froze halfway to her lips as the attendant's words registered. Her eyes darted to the man beside her, suddenly recognizing the distinctive profile that had been partially hidden by the cap. The world seemed to stop as realization dawned. She had just spent the last hour criticizing Denzel Washington's acting to his face. Catherine's champagne flute trembled slightly in her hand. She set it down with deliberate care, buying precious seconds to compose herself. The realization that she had been criticizing Denzel Washington's performance directly to Denzel Washington himself sent waves of mortification through her body. "Mr. Washington?" she managed, her voice higher than usual. I had no idea." Denzel looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It's fine," he said simply, turning back to his script. The flight attendant, sensing the tension, quickly collected their trays and moved on. Catherine sat frozen, mentally replaying every dismissive comment she'd made. The cabin suddenly felt unbearably small. "I'm actually a huge fan," she blurted out, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "That critique was just, I was playing devil's advocate. Critical thinking is part of my job." Denzel nodded without looking up. "Everyone's entitled to their opinion." His calm response somehow made Catherine feel worse than if he'd been angry. She reached for her laptop, desperate for distraction, but found herself unable to focus on the screen. Across the aisle, a woman whispered to her companion while casting glances in their direction. 2 rows ahead, someone appeared to be discreetly taking a photo. The meal service continued for the rest of the cabin. Catherine noticed that the flight attendants now moved with particular attentiveness around their row. One stopped beside them with a fresh basket of warm bread. "Would either of you care for more bread? Or perhaps dessert? We have a lovely cheesecake today." "No, thank you," Denzel replied politely. Catherine shook her head, her appetite gone. As the attendant moved away, Catherine felt compelled to salvage the situation. "Mr. Washington, I want to apologize." "Please, call me Denzel," he interrupted, his tone neither friendly nor unfriendly, merely neutral. "Denzel," she continued, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "I spoke without thinking. Your work in Sovereign Heart was actually quite powerful, especially the scene with your son." "The one I overacted?" he asked, a slight edge to his voice. Catherine flushed. "I shouldn't have said that. I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to acting." Denzel set his script down and turned toward her. "Can I ask you something, Ms. Winters?" "Catherine, please," she said quickly. "Catherine," he acknowledged, "do you always judge things you don't fully understand?" The question caught her off guard. I don't know what you mean." "You made definitive statements about my performance, about the film's quality, about my career trajectory, all presented as facts. Yet you just admitted you don't know much about acting." His words weren't delivered harshly, but they cut deep nonetheless. Catherine opened her mouth to defend herself, then closed it again. "I run a successful company," she said finally. "Making quick assessments is part of my job." "There's a difference between assessment and dismissal," Denzel replied. "One requires careful consideration. The other is just a reaction." Catherine felt an unfamiliar sensation, the uncomfortable heat of shame creeping up her neck. Before she could respond, a middle-aged man approached their row, his expression reverent. "Excuse me, Mr. Washington," he said. "I don't mean to intrude, but I just wanted to say what an honor it is to be on the same flight. Your work means a lot to me." Denzel's demeanor transformed instantly. He smiled warmly, thanking the man with genuine appreciation. When the passenger mentioned a particular film that had moved him, Denzel engaged thoughtfully, asking questions about what resonated with him. Catherine watched the interaction, struck by the contrast between Denzel's response to this stranger and her own earlier behavior toward the flight attendants. The man eventually returned to his seat, visibly delighted by the exchange. "That happens often?" Catherine asked. "Often enough," Denzel replied, returning to his reserved demeanor. "People connect with stories. Sometimes they want to share what that connection meant to them. And you don't find it annoying being approached by strangers?" Denzel considered the question. "If someone takes the time to share how your work affected them, the least you can do is listen. It costs nothing to be respectful." The words hung in the air between them. Catherine fidgeted with her watch, uncomfortable under his steady gaze. "I've watched many of your films," she offered, attempting to shift the conversation. "Training Day was brilliant. And Remember the Titans? My father showed me that when I was young." "Thank you," Denzel said, though his tone suggested he recognized the attempted deflection. "I wasn't always like this," Catherine continued, surprising herself with the admission. When I started in tech, I was told I needed to be twice as tough as any man to be taken seriously. And now it's just who I am, I guess." She met his eyes, then quickly looked away. "It works in my world." "Does it?" Denzel asked, his question hanging in the air. Before Catherine could respond, turbulence shook the plane. The captain's voice came over the intercom, requesting passengers to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. The momentary distraction felt like a reprieve to Catherine. As the plane steadied, Denzel returned to his script. Catherine stared out the window at the endless expanse of clouds, his question echoing in her mind. Did her approach really work? She had the corner office, the magazine features, the enviable bank account. But something about Denzel's quiet dignity made those achievements suddenly feel hollow. Her phone chimed with a message from her assistant. Next Gen CEO requesting dinner tonight instead of tomorrow. Available. Normally, Catherine would have immediately rearranged her schedule for such an important client. Instead, she found herself hesitating, thinking about Denzel's words about respect and consideration. "Something important?" Denzel asked, noticing her contemplation. "Just work," she replied, then added, "A client wanting to change plans last minute." "And that bothers you?" "It should," Catherine said slowly. "My time is valuable. I should be annoyed." "But you're not." Catherine stared at the message. "I'm reconsidering some things." Denzel nodded and returned to his script, but there was a subtle shift in his expression, a hint of approval that Catherine found herself unexpectedly craving. The captain announced they were beginning their initial descent into New York. Catherine realized they had been flying for hours, yet she had accomplished none of the work she'd planned. Instead, she'd experienced something far more disruptive, the first cracks in the carefully constructed armor she'd worn for years. As the plane began its descent, Catherine prepared herself for the most uncomfortable remaining hours of the flight, unaware that the most profound part of this unexpected encounter was yet to come. The plane continued its descent toward New York. Catherine found herself in the unfamiliar position of being at a loss for words. She had built her career on always knowing exactly what to say, on dominating every conversation, yet now she sat in uncomfortable silence beside a man she had thoughtlessly criticized minutes earlier. Denzel remained focused on his script, occasionally making notes in the margins. His concentration appeared complete, as if the awkward exchange had never happened. Catherine envied his composure. The lead flight attendant approached their row. "Mr. Washington, the captain asked me to personally ensure you have everything you need before landing. Is there anything I can get for you?" "I'm fine, thank you," Denzel replied with a warm smile. "But I appreciate you checking." "Of course, and the car service you requested will be waiting at the terminal." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "My mother has seen Fences 12 times. Your performance changed how she sees her own life." Denzel's eyes softened. "Please tell her thank you, that means a lot." The attendant nodded, visibly touched by his response before continuing her rounds. Catherine observed the interaction with newfound awareness. The woman hadn't asked for a photo or autograph. She'd simply shared something personal, and Denzel had received it with genuine appreciation. "Do you prepare differently for stage versus screen?" Catherine asked suddenly, surprising herself. With her interest, Denzel looked up, perhaps equally surprised by her sincere question. "Yes," he said after a moment. "Theater is a complete experience, beginning to end without stopping. Film is fragmented, shot out of sequence. The preparation has to account for that." "That sounds challenging," Catherine said. "Maintaining emotional continuity when everything's broken up." "It can be," he agreed, "but that's the craft, finding truth in artificial circumstances." The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, shuddering slightly. Catherine gripped her armrest, her knuckles whitening. Denzel noticed but said nothing. "I don't like turbulence," she admitted, abandoning her usually unflappable facade. "Not many people do," Denzel said. He closed his script and tucked it into his bag. "Puts things in perspective, though. Reminds you what matters." Catherine looked at him. "And what matters to you?" "Family," he answered without hesitation. "Faith. Doing work that means something." Is that why you choose such serious roles? Choose stories that need telling, he corrected gently. Sometimes those are serious, sometimes not. Catherine nodded, thinking about her own career choices, always pursuing what was profitable, rarely questioning if it was meaningful. The fasten seatbelt sign illuminated as the plane descended through a layer of clouds. A flight attendant moved through the cabin, checking that tray tables were stowed and seats were upright. When she reached their row, she smiled warmly at Denzel. "We'll be landing shortly, Mr. Washington. It's been an honor having you on board today." "Thank you for the excellent service," he replied. As the attendant moved on, Catherine felt compelled to speak. "I should have been kinder to the staff earlier," she said quietly. Denzel studied her for a moment. "It's never too late to change how you treat people." "Even after making a terrible first impression?" she asked with a self-deprecating smile. "Especially then," he replied. The comment hung between them as the plane continued its descent. Catherine stared out the window at the approaching cityscape, the familiar skyline of Manhattan coming into view. She had made this trip dozens of times, always focused on the meetings ahead, the deals to close, the people to impress. For the first time, she found herself questioning the purpose behind it all. "Can I ask you something personal?" Catherine said, turning back to Denzel. He nodded, his expression open. "How do you stay I don't know, grounded with all your success?" Denzel considered the question carefully. "I remember where I came from, who helped me get here, and I try to keep perspective about what this business really is, telling stories that connect people to something deeper than themselves." "That sounds meaningful," Catherine said, a hint of envy in her voice. "What about your work?" Denzel asked. "What gives it meaning?" The question caught her off guard. She started to give her usual answer about market disruption and technological innovation, but stopped herself. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "When I started, I wanted to create products that made people's lives better. Somewhere along the way, it became about the next acquisition, the bigger office, proving I belonged at the table." Denzel nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding rather than judgment. "Success can be disorienting if you lose sight of your purpose." The plane's wheels touched down on the runway with a slight jolt. Passengers around them began gathering their belongings, the cabin filling with the sounds of seatbelts unbuckling and overhead compartments opening. "I don't think I've had a real conversation like this in years," Catherine confessed, surprised by her own candor. "Maybe that's part of the problem," Denzel suggested gently. As the plane taxied to the gate, Catherine noticed several passengers stealing glances at Denzel, whispering excitedly to one another. A young flight attendant approached, nervously, clutching a napkin. "Mr. Washington, I'm so sorry to bother you, but would you mind?" She held out the napkin and a pen. "My brother is studying acting, and you're his hero." "What's his name?" Denzel asked, taking the napkin. "Marcus," she replied, her face lighting up. Denzel wrote a personal message before signing his name and returning it to her. "Tell Marcus to keep working hard. This business isn't about fame, it's about craft." "I will." "Thank you so much," she said, clutching the napkin as if it were precious. Catherine watched the exchange, struck by the genuine way Denzel engaged with the young woman, not as a fan to be tolerated, but as a person worthy of his full attention. It was a stark contrast to how she typically treated those she considered beneath her professional status. As the plane reached the gate, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers rose in unison, eager to disembark. Denzel remained seated, letting the initial rush subside. "Do you have a car waiting?" he asked Catherine. "Yes," she replied automatically, then hesitated. "Actually, I usually take a car service into the city." Denzel nodded. "Traffic will be heavy this time of day." "It always is," Catherine agreed, gathering her belongings. She paused, then added, "Mr. Washington, Denzel, I want to apologize again for my comments earlier. They were thoughtless and wrong." Denzel looked at her, his gaze direct yet kind. "We all say things we regret, Catherine. The question is whether we learn from those moments." As they finally stood to leave, Catherine noticed a shift in herself, a sense of awareness that hadn't been there when she boarded the plane. Something fundamental had changed during this flight, something she couldn't yet fully articulate, but felt deeply nonetheless. Standing in the aisle, waiting to exit, she realized. That meeting Denzel Washington hadn't just been embarrassing, it had been illuminating. And the full impact of this revelation was only beginning to unfold. Catherine stood in the lavish bathroom of her suite at the plaza, staring at her reflection in the gilded mirror. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Physically, she appeared the same, perfectly styled blonde hair, flawless makeup, designer clothes, but something in her eyes had changed. A certainty had been replaced by questions. She splashed cold water on her face, not caring about her makeup. 4. Hours had passed since she'd disembarked from the plane, since she'd awkwardly said goodbye to Denzel Washington in the terminal. He had been gracious until the end, wishing her well with a sincerity that only deepened her shame. "What is wrong with you?" she whispered to her reflection. The bathroom's marble surfaces threw her voice back at her, making the question echo. Catherine's phone buzzed on the counter, her assistant calling again. She had been dodging calls since landing, something entirely out of character. Catherine Winters never avoided work. She prided herself on being constantly available, constantly in control. She let it ring. Walking back into the main room, Catherine sank onto the edge of the king-sized bed. The view outside her window showcased Central Park in autumn splendor, a tableau of reds and golds that would normally prompt her to snap a photo for Instagram. Instead, she found herself remembering fragments of her conversation with Denzel. "Do you always judge things you don't fully understand?" The question had pierced her carefully constructed armor. How many times had she made snap judgments about people, products, situations? How many times had she dismissed someone based on appearance or first impressions? Catherine's rise in Silicon Valley had been meteoric. At 37, she had built Winters Tech Solutions from a startup into a powerhouse. The tech media called her ruthless, visionary, uncompromising, all terms she had embraced as compliments. Her management style was infamous. She fired people who couldn't keep up, belittled ideas she considered weak, and demanded nothing less than perfection. It had worked. Until today, she had never questioned if success achieved through fear was worth celebrating. Catherine reached for the hotel phone and ordered a pot of tea, then cancelled the next-gen dinner with a brief text. She needed this evening alone, needed space to process what had happened on that flight. When her tea arrived, Catherine carried it to the window seat overlooking the park. As dusk descended on the city, lights began twinkling across the Manhattan skyline. She remembered her first trip to New York, fresh out of Stanford with nothing but ambition and a business plan, rejected by 12 venture capitalists. She had been hungry then, not just for success, but to create something meaningful. When had that changed? When had intimidating others become her default approach? She thought about her executive team, how they tiptoed around her, how meetings fell silent when she entered the room. She had interpreted their behavior as respect, but sitting here now she recognized it for what it truly was: fear. Catherine pulled out her phone and opened her photo gallery. She scrolled past countless images of herself at industry events, accepting awards, posing with celebrities and tech luminaries. In every photo she wore the same expression: confident, slightly aloof, a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. She paused on a particular photo from 3 years ago, the opening of their new headquarters. Catherine stood front and center, cutting a ribbon, surrounded by her team. She zoomed in on their faces, seeing something she'd never noticed before: the strained smiles, the tension in their postures, the careful distance they maintained from her. Her tea grew cold as memories flooded back. The time she had publicly berated her chief marketing officer for a minor error in a presentation. The assistant she had fired for scheduling a meeting 30 minutes later than requested. The countless times she had interrupted colleagues mid-sentence because she deemed their ideas unworthy of her time. It costs nothing to be respectful. Denzel's words echoed in her mind. Such a simple statement, yet so profound in its implications. Catherine had convinced herself that her harsh approach was necessary, that it drove excellence. But what if she was wrong? What if her tactics weren't creating success but limiting it? What if people performed better when inspired rather than terrified? Her phone buzzed again, a text from Richard, her COO. Everything okay? Not like you to go dark. Catherine stared at the message, considering her response. The old Catherine would have fired back something dismissive, perhaps with a cutting remark about his neediness. Instead, she typed, "Taking some personal time tonight, let's connect in the morning." She sent it, then added, "And Richard, thank you for checking in." Setting down her phone, Catherine walked to her suitcase and extracted her laptop. She opened her company's website, seeing it with fresh eyes. The landing page featured her prominently: Catherine Winters, tech visionary, disruptor, game changer. The copy was all about dominance, about crushing competition, about revolutionizing industries. Nowhere did it mention helping people, improving lives, or creating meaningful connections. When had her company's mission become so hollow? Catherine closed the laptop and returned to the window. Night had fallen completely now, the park a dark expanse amid the city's glow. She thought about Denzel's interaction with the flight attendant, who had mentioned her mother watching Fences. He hadn't dismissed the comment or offered a rehearsed response. He had taken a moment to genuinely acknowledge the impact of his work on someone's life. When was the last time Catherine had considered how her work affected others, beyond profit margins and market share? She remembered a project from early in her career, an accessibility interface that helped visually impaired users navigate websites more effectively. Catherine had poured her heart into that project, had even worked directly with users to refine the experience. The financial return had been modest, but the letters of gratitude from users had meant everything to her then. What would that younger Catherine think of who she had become? Catherine's phone chimed with an email notification. It was from NextGen's CEO, expressing disappointment about the cancelled dinner, but offering to reschedule. The tone was deferential, almost apologetic, the message of someone who feared repercussions. Catherine began typing a response, then stopped. Tomorrow, she decided. She would deal with it tomorrow when she'd had more time to process everything. For now, she needed to sit with this discomfort, this strange new awareness that had been awakened during those hours beside Denzel Washington. She needed to examine the foundation upon which she had built her success and ask herself uncomfortable questions about its stability. As she watched the distant figures moving through the park below, couples strolling hand in hand, families heading home after a day of adventure, friends laughing together on benches, Catherine felt a longing for connections she hadn't acknowledged in years. Success can be disorienting if you lose sight of your purpose. Perhaps that was it. She had lost sight of her purpose, had confused accumulation with achievement, had mistaken fear for respect. Catherine Winters, who always had an answer for everything, found herself embracing a question instead. Who did she truly want to be? The answer, she realized, would require more courage than any business deal she had ever negotiated. Morning sunlight streamed through the hotel windows as Catherine prepared for her meeting with NextGen Technologies. She dressed in her usual power attire, a tailored navy suit with subtle red accents, but hesitated before her customary application of bold red lipstick. On impulse, she selected a softer shade, studying the subtle difference in her reflection. Her phone chimed with a text from the car service. Driver waiting downstairs. Catherine gathered her materials and headed to the elevator. The plaza's opulent lobby bustled with morning activity, tourists planning their day, business travelers checking out, staff attending to requests with practiced efficiency. Catherine noticed a bellhop struggling with an elderly woman's luggage. Yesterday she might have brushed past without a glance. Today she paused. "Let me get the door for you," she said, holding it open as the young man maneuvered the cart through. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied, surprise evident in his voice. A small gesture, but it felt right. Catherine continued to her waiting car, sliding into the back seat with a clear good morning to the driver, another departure from her usual silent entry, followed by curt directions. As the car navigated through Manhattan traffic, Catherine's thoughts returned to yesterday's flight. She had spent hours replaying her interaction with Denzel Washington, cringing at her behavior, while simultaneously feeling grateful for the wake-up call it had provided. Her phone rang. Richard, again. "Catherine, just checking in before your..." Next-gen meeting. The team put together some additional projections that might help close the deal. Thanks, Richard. Listen, I've been thinking about our approach with next-gen. What about it, the aggressive strategy we discussed should... I want to try something different, Catherine interrupted, then caught herself. Sorry for cutting you. Off. Please continue. The silence on the other end spoke volumes about Richard's surprise. I was just going to say our usual approach has worked in the past. It has, Catherine acknowledged. But I'm wondering if we're truly addressing their needs or just focusing on what we want from the relationship. More silence. Catherine could almost see Richard's bewildered expression. Are you feeling all right? He finally asked. Catherine laughed. A genuine sound rather than her usual calculated chuckle. I'm fine, just reconsidering some things. The car pulled up to a sleek glass tower in Midtown. I'm here. Let's reconnect after my meeting. Catherine entered the building, her mind still churning with new perspectives. The receptionist greeted her warmly, escorting her to a conference room where NextGen's executive team awaited. As she arranged her materials, a text message appeared on her phone. Unknown number, good luck with your meeting today. Remember, true connection comes from listening, not just waiting for your turn to speak. Denzel, Washington. Catherine stared at the message, astonished. She hadn't given him her number. Then she remembered completing a contact information card for the airline's first-class services. He must have asked for it, but why? Before she could ponder further, NextGen's CEO entered the room. Ms. Winters, thank you for making time in your schedule. We were disappointed about dinner, but we understand how valuable your time is. Catherine shook his hand firmly. Please, call me Catherine, and I should be the one thanking you for your flexibility. The surprise on his face mirrored Richard's reaction earlier. Catherine's reputation clearly preceded her. As the meeting began, Catherine found herself approaching it differently. Instead of launching into her prepared pitch, she asked questions. She listened, really listened, to their challenges, their goals, their concerns. When she finally presented her company's solutions, she connected them directly to what she had heard. 2 hours later, Catherine emerged from the building with not only a signed contract, but something more valuable, the foundation of a genuine business relationship based on mutual respect rather than intimidation. Back in her hotel room that afternoon, Catherine stared at Denzel's text message again. After several attempts at drafting a response, she finally typed, "Thank you for the advice, it worked. I'm learning that real strength isn't about dominating conversations, but elevating them." She hesitated, then pressed send. To her surprise, a IRC response came almost immediately. Glad to hear it. Are you free for coffee? There's a small place near your hotel, 4 p.m. Catherine read the message twice, certain she had misunderstood. Denzel, Washington wanted to meet for coffee? After how she had behaved on the plane? Yes, I'd like that, she replied before she could overthink it. At precisely 3:55 p.m., Catherine entered the small cafe Denzel had specified. It was unassuming, the kind of place she would normally walk past without a glance. No marble countertops, no famous baristas, just a warm atmosphere and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans. She spotted him immediately in a corner booth, dressed simply as he had been on the flight, a cap pulled low over his eyes. Despite his attempt at anonymity, there was no disguising his presence, the quiet confidence, the dignified posture. A few patrons cast curious glances his way, but most respected his privacy. Denzel stood as she approached, extending his hand. "Catherine, thank you for coming." "I'm the one who should be thanking you," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Your message came at exactly the right moment." A server approached, and Denzel ordered a simple black coffee. Catherine, who typically requested elaborate custom drinks, found herself saying, "The same for me, please." When they were alone again, Catherine struggled to find the right words. "I keep replaying yesterday in my mind. I was so—" "We've covered that," Denzel interrupted gently. "You apologized. I accepted. Let's move forward." Catherine nodded, grateful for the reprieve. "Can I ask why you wanted to meet? I wouldn't have blamed you for never wanting to see me again." Denzel considered her question, his expression thoughtful. "Something you said on the plane stayed with me. about not always being the person you've become. I believe people can change when they're ready to see themselves clearly. And you think I'm ready? Catherine asked. I think you're asking the right questions, he replied. That's always the first step. Their coffee arrived, and Catherine took a sip, surprised by how much she enjoyed the straightforward flavor without her usual additions. How was your meeting? Denzel asked. Catherine smiled. Successful, but not in the way I would have defined. Success yesterday. I actually listened. I focused on what they needed, not just on closing the deal. And it felt right, she admitted. More satisfying than bulldozing my way to a signature. Denzel nodded. In my work, I've learned that the most powerful scenes aren't about who can shout the loudest or deliver the cleverest line. They're about authentic connection, finding the truth between characters. Business isn't so different, Catherine reflected. I've been performing a role for so long, the ruthless CEO, that I forgot it was a choice, not an obligation. Roles can become comfortable, Denzel said, even when they no longer serve us. They talked for nearly an hour, about career expectations, about finding meaning in work, about the difference between success and fulfillment. Catherine found herself opening up about her early struggles in a male-dominated industry, how she had adopted a harsh persona as armor against discrimination and doubt. I thought I needed to be feared to be respected, she confessed. A common misconception, Denzel replied. Real respect can't be demanded, only earned through how you treat others. As their conversation drew to a close, Catherine felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. Thank you for this, she said. Not many people would offer guidance to someone who behaved as I did. We all need mirrors sometimes, Denzel said. People who reflect back who we really are, not just who we present ourselves to be. Catherine thought about the people in her life, how many were true mirrors, and how many simply showed her what she wanted to see. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Denzel offered one final piece of advice. The hardest person to be honest with is yourself, but it's the only way to grow. Catherine watched him disappear into the New York crowd, a legendary actor who had somehow seen potential in her that she had nearly forgotten existed. Tomorrow she would fly back to San Francisco. For the first time in years, she was excited not just about what she would accomplish, but about who she might become. As the morning sun cast long shadows across Central Park, Catherine found herself walking along its winding paths. She had risen early, restless with thoughts of yesterday's conversation with Denzel. Her meeting with NextGen wasn't until the afternoon, giving her rare free hours in New York, time she would typically fill with additional work calls or emails. Today felt different. She needed space to think. Catherine had always prided herself on efficiency, on squeezing productivity from every minute. Contemplative walks were for people with too much time on their hands, or so she had believed. Now, watching joggers and dog walkers enjoy the crisp autumn morning, she wondered what else she had dismissed too quickly. Her phone vibrated. Catherine expected it to be Richard or someone from the office, but instead saw Denzel's name on the screen. Central Park this morning. The Bethesda Fountain at 8:30 if you're interested. Sometimes wisdom comes easier with fresh air. Catherine checked her watch. 8:15. She quickened her pace, navigating toward the heart of the park. The Bethesda Fountain stood majestically amid the fall foliage, water cascading from the Angel of the Waters statue. Several tourists snapped photos while locals hurried past on their morning commutes. Denzel sat on a bench nearby, a paper cup of coffee in hand, looking remarkably ordinary in jeans and a grey sweatshirt. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said as Catherine approached. Neither was I, she admitted, sitting beside him. I don't usually do spontaneous, Denzel smiled. That's exactly why I suggested it. Growth happens outside our comfort zones. A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched the fountain. Catherine realized she rarely allowed silence in her life. It was always filled with phone calls, meetings, the constant buzz of productivity. Yesterday you mentioned finding meaning in your work, Denzel said finally. What did that mean to you when you first started your company? Catherine considered the question. I wanted to create technology that made people feel connected, not isolated. I saw so many digital tools that were efficient but cold, functional but alienating. And now? Now we measure success by market share and quarterly growth, she admitted. The mission got lost somewhere along the way. Denzel nodded thoughtfully. It happens gradually. You make small compromises that seem reasonable at the time. Then one day you look up and find yourself far from where you intended to be. Is that what happened to you? Catherine asked. In some ways, he acknowledged. Early in my career, I was so focused on proving myself that I sometimes chose roles based on visibility rather than substance. It took time to learn that a meaningful career is built on meaningful choices. A jogger passed by, recognizing Denzel with a double take, but respectfully continuing without interruption. How do you handle it? Catherine asked. Being recognized everywhere you go. I remember that fame. Isn't the same as accomplishment, he replied. One is about being seen, the other is about doing something worth seeing. Catherine thought about her own pursuit of recognition, the awards on her office wall, the magazine covers framed in the reception area, the speaking engagements she accepted primarily for their prestige. I've been chasing the wrong things, she said quietly. Perhaps, Denzel agreed, but recognition isn't inherently negative. It's about what you do with the platform it provides. He gestured toward the fountain. The artist who created that angel wasn't seeking fame. She wanted to celebrate the clean water coming to New York, to honor the lives saved by that advancement. Yet her work has touched millions over the years. Catherine studied the statue with new appreciation. I never knew that history. Most people don't, Denzel said. They see beauty without knowing its purpose. That's the challenge with success, separating what dazzles from what truly matters. A child ran past them, laughing as he chased a squirrel. Catherine watched him, reminded of a simpler time in her own life. My father worked 60-hour weeks at an insurance company, she said unexpectedly. He kept promising that once he made regional manager, he'd have more time for family. He died of a heart attack 3 months after getting the promotion. I was 14. Denzel's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry. I swore I'd never make that mistake, Catherine continued. I'd achieve success early and actually enjoy it. Yet somehow I've ended up working even longer hours than he did, with even less connection to what matters. It's not too late to change course, Denzel said. Success without fulfillment is just busy work with better compensation. Catherine laughed, appreciating his directness. I've been successful by most external measures, but I can't remember the last time I felt truly fulfilled. What would fulfill you now? Denzel asked. Not the Catherine who started her company, but the woman sitting here today. It was a question she hadn't considered in years. Catherine watched the sunlight play across the water before answering. Want to create technology that actually improves people's lives, that helps them connect rather than compare, collaborate rather than compete. And I want to build a company where people feel valued, not just valuable. Denzel nodded. That sounds like a mission worth pursuing. But can I change course now? Catherine asked. I've created a company culture in my own image. People expect a certain Catherine Winters. People adapt, Denzel replied, especially when the change is authentic. No great performance was ever delivered without the actor believing in the role. He checked his watch. I have to head to a meeting soon, but I wanted to share something with you. From his pocket, he withdrew a small, worn book and handed it to Catherine. She opened it carefully, finding passages highlighted throughout, quotes about leadership, purpose, and living with intention. My first acting teacher gave me this, Denzel explained. It's helped me find my way back when I've gotten lost. I'd like you to borrow it for a while. Catherine was speechless, overwhelmed by the gesture. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Denzel replied. Just consider it a reminder that we're all works in progress. As they stood to part ways, Catherine felt compelled to ask one last question. Why did you reach out to me after the flight? After how I behaved, most people would have been glad to never see me again. Denzel considered her question carefully. In my experience, people who are hardest on others are often fighting battles we know nothing about. Sometimes they need compassion more than correction. He smiled. Besides, I recognize something in you, a hunger for more than success, a desire for significance. Catherine felt tears threatening, an unfamiliar sensation for someone who prided herself on emotional control in professional settings. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Denzel replied with a gentle smile. "The hard part comes. Next, taking what you've learned and actually living it." As Catherine watched him walk away, she clutched the small book in her hands. The wisdom it contained wasn't just in its pages, but in the journey it represented. From performance to authenticity, from success to significance. The fountain continued its eternal cascade behind her, a reminder that transformation, like water, could reshape even the hardest surfaces given enough time and persistent flow. Catherine's return flight to San Francisco departed at 6:30 p.m. As she settled into her first-class seat, she experienced the familiar environment with new awareness. The flight attendant who greeted her received a genuine smile and thank you. The passenger struggling with an oversized bag in the overhead compartment received an offer of assistance rather than an impatient sigh. Small changes, but they felt significant. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Catherine opened Denzel's book, finding a passage highlighted in faded yellow. True transformation is not a single moment, but a series of decisions made differently than before. Ran her finger over the words, wondering how many times Denzel had read them, how they had shaped his own journey. The seat beside her remained empty. No chance encounter this time, no unexpected lesson. Yet Catherine felt Denzel's influence in her changed perspective. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged, and Catherine's phone buzzed with a call from Megan, her marketing director. Typically, Catherine would answer regardless of restrictions. Rules were for people without her influence. Today, she silenced the ringer and waited for proper time. When the plane reached cruising altitude, Catherine returned the call. "Catherine, sorry to bother you," Megan began, her voice carrying its usual tension when speaking with the CEO. "We have a situation with the Rivera campaign. The creative team missed the mark completely, and we need to restart from scratch. I've already put them on notice that—" "Wait," Catherine interrupted. "What exactly is wrong with their work?" Megan sounded surprised by the question. Catherine normally trusted her judgment implicitly when it came to disciplining underperforming teams. "It's too emotional, not focused enough on metrics and performance stats. I told them we need to emphasize technological superiority, not user experience." Catherine thought about her conversation with Denzel, about connection versus competition. "Can you send me what they've created?" "Of course, but trust me, it's not our style. It shows people actually using our platform to connect with family across distances, sharing meaningful moments. Very soft, not our usual aggressive approach." Catherine smiled to herself. "Let's look at it together tomorrow. And Megan, let's hold off on any reprimands until then." "But they missed the deadline and—" "Tomorrow," Catherine said firmly, but without her usual biting tone. "Some deadlines are worth extending." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, Megan responded with audible confusion. "Yes, of course, thank you, Catherine." After they disconnected, Catherine stared out the window at the darkening sky. For years, she had driven her team with relentless pressure, equating stress with productivity. What might they accomplish in an environment of support rather than fear? The flight attendant approached with the dinner service. "Would you care for the salmon or beef tonight, Ms. Winters?" "The salmon, please," Catherine replied. Then, noticing the attendant's nameplate, she added, "Thank you, Julia." The simple acknowledgement of the woman's name produced a genuine smile, not the practiced customer service expression, but a moment of human connection. "You're welcome," Julia replied, her posture relaxing slightly. "Would you like wine with your meal?" "Just water tonight," Catherine said, thinking of Denzel's simple choice on their flight. As Catherine ate, she opened her laptop and found the email from Megan with the creative team's work attached. The proposed campaign was indeed a departure. From their usual approach, it showed genuine human moments facilitated by their technology, rather than technical specifications or competitive comparisons. One image particularly struck her. An elderly woman using their video platform to read a bedtime story to her granddaughter thousands of miles away, both faces illuminated with joy. The tagline read, Technology that brings us closer, not just faster. It was precisely the vision Catherine had when founding the company. Technology as a bridge between people, not just a tool for efficiency. Somewhere along the way, that vision had been buried beneath market share goals and competitive positioning. Catherine typed a quick response to Megan. "I love the direction. Let's develop this further. Schedule time with the creative team tomorrow. I want to thank them personally." She sent the email, then sat back, imagining Megan's reaction to this dramatic departure from protocol. Catherine had never personally thanked a team before. She had always believed praise bred complacency. Another notification appeared on her screen, an email from Richard with the subject line, "Winter's Tech Culture Survey Results, Confidential." Catherine hesitated before opening it. The annual culture survey was something she had always treated as a formality, glancing at executive summaries while dismissing negative feedback as coming from underperformers who couldn't handle high standards. This time, she read every word, feeling each critique like a personal revelation. Fear-based culture, where mistakes are punished rather than learned from. Excellent compensation but poor work-life balance. Innovative products but toxic environment. Leadership equates intimidation with motivation. The most damning comment came from an anonymous senior leader. "We succeed despite our culture, not because of it. Imagine what we could accomplish if we weren't afraid to speak honestly." Catherine closed the document, her meal forgotten. She had created this reality. Every cutting remark, every public criticism, every dismissed idea had shaped a company culture that achieved results, but crushed spirits in the process. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, causing glasses to rattle on trays. Catherine gripped her armrest, remembering Denzel's words about perspective. The momentary discomfort prompted her to think about the greater journey. She opened a new document on her laptop and began typing, outlining a different vision for Winter's Tech, one that maintained excellence but fostered psychological safety, that pursued innovation through collaboration rather than competition. By the time the captain announced their initial descent into San Francisco, Catherine had drafted a comprehensive plan for transformation, beginning with her own leadership approach. The first item on her list: individual meetings with each executive to listen, truly listen, to their experiences and ideas. As the plane touched down, Catherine felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Changing an established culture never was, especially when that culture emanated from its founder. Some might view her new approach as weakness. Others might resist change altogether. But Catherine now understood what Denzel had tried to teach her. True strength wasn't found in dominating others, but in elevating them. The plane taxied to the gate, and passengers began gathering their belongings. Catherine remained seated, allowing others to exit first, another small but meaningful change in behavior. As she finally stood to leave, Julia, the flight attendant, caught her eye. "Have a wonderful evening, Ms. Winters." "Thank you, Julia," Catherine replied. "You've provided excellent service tonight." The simple compliment brought a look of surprised gratitude to the woman's face, a reminder of how rare genuine appreciation had become in a world of transactional interactions. Walking through the terminal toward the exit, Catherine felt lighter, somehow, as if she had set down a heavy burden she'd been carrying for years. The transformation ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, she was looking forward to the journey rather than just the destination. Catherine's Tesla glided through the San Francisco fog toward her Pacific Heights home. The familiar route felt different tonight, the city lights softened by both the mist and her shifted perspective. She had told her driver she'd take the wheel herself tonight, another break from routine. As she navigated the hills of San Francisco, Catherine reflected on the past 48 hours. Had it really been only 2 days since she boarded that flight to New York, since she sat beside Denzel Washington and had her carefully constructed world turned upside down? Her phone rang through the car's speakers. Richard again. "Catherine, sorry to call so late. I just saw your email about tomorrow's all-hands meeting. Are you sure about this? Announcing a culture shift without preparing the executive team first is unusual." Catherine smiled at his diplomatic choice of words. Unusual was Richard's way of saying he thought she'd lost her mind. I'm sure, Richard, some announcements need to come directly from me, not filtered through layers of management. But the points you outlined, increased decision-making autonomy, 4 teams, a formal mentorship program, revisiting our performance metrics to include collaboration and development, these are significant changes to how we operate. They are, Catherine agreed, turning onto her street, and long overdue. A pause on the line. Catherine, is everything all right? Ever since New York, you've been different. She pulled into her driveway, the motion sensors illuminating the path to her front door. A beautiful home she rarely spent time in, filled with expensive art she barely noticed anymore. I'm more than all right, Richard. For the first time in years, I'm seeing clearly. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Get some rest. Catherine ended the call and sat in her car for a moment, looking at her house. She had purchased it 3 years ago, a modern architectural masterpiece featured in design magazines, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. It was a symbol of achievement, a trophy home for a trophy career, yet it had never felt like home. Inside, Catherine moved through the minimalist space, trailing her fingers along cold marble countertops and sterile white furniture chosen by an interior designer to project success and sophistication. The walls displayed abstract art selected for investment value rather than emotional resonance. She kicked off her heels and padded to the kitchen, realizing she hadn't eaten a proper dinner on the plane. Opening her refrigerator revealed its usual state, nearly empty except for protein shakes, champagne, and takeout containers. Catherine couldn't remember the last time she had cooked a meal. Instead of ordering in as usual, she made herself a simple sandwich and carried it, along with Denzel's book, to her rarely used balcony. The night air was cool against her skin as she settled into a chair overlooking the glittering city below. Opening the book again, Catherine found another highlighted passage. The measure of your impact is not in what you acquire, but in what you give away. She thought about her company, about the technology they created. Had they been giving people tools to improve their lives, or just more digital noise to navigate? Had she been building something meaningful, or merely accumulating power and wealth? Catherine's phone buzzed with a notification, an email from the creative team who had developed the new campaign. Despite the late hour, they had sent revised concepts based on her encouraging feedback, their excitement palpable in every word. They had included a note, "This is the kind of work we've always wanted to do for Winters Tech. Thank you for the opportunity." Catherine felt a pang of regret for all the times she had shut down creative approaches in favor of aggressive marketing. How much innovation had been stifled by her narrow vision of success? She responded immediately. "These are excellent. Let's discuss expanding this approach across all product lines. Your work reminds me why we started this company in the first place." After sending the email, Catherine opened her calendar app and began making changes to her schedule for the coming week. She cancelled 3 speaking engagements focused on dominating the market and rescheduled several internal meetings to allow for more meaningful discussion time. Then she did something she'd never done before. She blocked out 2 hours each day for reflection and strategic thinking. No calls, no emails, no interruptions. Time to ensure she wouldn't lose sight of what mattered amid the daily demands of running a company. Catherine's phone rang again. An unknown number. She almost declined it out of habit, but answered on impulse. Catherine Winters. "Did I wake you?" Denzel's voice was instantly recognizable. "No, I'm actually on my balcony reading your book. Finding anything useful?" "Everything," Catherine admitted. "I'm making changes already. Tomorrow, I'm announcing a complete culture shift at the company." "That's a bold move," Denzel said. "How do you think it will be received?" Catherine watched the fog roll across the bay, enveloping the lights of Oakland in the distance. "With shock, probably. Maybe some resistance. I've built a reputation on being ruthless and results-driven. Emphasizing compassion and connection will seem like weakness to some, or like evolution to others," Denzel suggested. "The strongest leaders are those who can adapt without losing their core principles." "I think I lost sight of my core principles a long time ago," Catherine said quietly. "But you're finding them again," Denzel replied. "That's what matters." They talked for nearly an hour, about leadership, about regret, about the courage required to change course when you've invested years traveling in one direction. Denzel shared stories of his own career transitions, of times when he had to reject lucrative roles that didn't align with his values. "The hardest no I ever said was to a film that would have paid more than any previous project," he explained. "But the character perpetuated stereotypes I'd worked my whole career to break down. Walking away cost me millions, but saved something more valuable, my integrity." As their conversation drew to a close, Catherine felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in years. "I need to thank you," she said, "for seeing past my behavior on that flight, for recognizing something in me worth engaging with." "I believe people deserve second chances," Denzel replied, "and sometimes all we need is someone to hold up a mirror at the right moment." After they said goodbye, Catherine remained on the balcony, watching the city lights and contemplating the path ahead. Tomorrow would be challenging. Announcing such fundamental changes would create uncertainty, resistance, and perhaps even ridicule from competitors who would interpret her new direction as weakness. Yet for the first time in her career, Catherine wasn't motivated by external validation or competitive positioning. She was driven by something more profound, a desire to align her actions with her values, to create a legacy built on connection rather than conquest. As midnight approached, Catherine finally went inside, feeling the weight of exhaustion from her travels and emotional revelations. She fell asleep with Denzel's book beside her, open to a page where he had underlined a simple truth. Each day offers a new opportunity to rewrite your story. Tomorrow, Catherine would begin rewriting hers, not as a ruthless tech CEO, but as a leader who understood that true power came from empowering others. 6 months had passed since Catherine's flight with Denzel Washington. Spring sunshine streamed through the windows of Winters Tech's headquarters, illuminating a space transformed not just in appearance, but in energy. Gone were the sterile white walls and intimidating minimalist design. In their place, collaborative spaces filled with comfortable seating, plants bringing life to every corner, and walls showcasing the real people who used their technology. Not marketing models, but actual customers whose lives had been improved by their products. Catherine walked through the open workspace, exchanging genuine smiles with her team. Employees no longer fell silent when she approached or scrambled to look busy. Instead, there was a natural ebb and flow of conversation, of ideas being shared without fear of judgment. "Morning, Catherine," called Maya, a junior developer who, 6 months ago, would have been too intimidated to make eye contact with the CEO. "The accessibility features we discussed are ready for testing whenever you have time." "That's wonderful, Maya. I've blocked out an hour this afternoon," Catherine replied. She had made a commitment to be personally involved in their accessibility initiatives, a return to the work that had once given her the greatest satisfaction. Catherine continued to her office, which now featured glass walls instead of the imposing, solid doors that had once separated her from the team. Transparency had become more than a buzzword. It was a physical reality in the workspace. Richard waited inside, data tablets spread across the conference table. He looked up as she entered, his expression thoughtful. "The quarterly results are in," he said, and Catherine set down her coffee mug, a handmade piece gifted by the design team, replacing her former status symbol vessel. Richard smiled. "Up 17%. The new campaign is resonating exactly as you predicted. Turns out showing how our technology connects people, rather than just touting its technical superiority, actually sells better." Catherine nodded, pleased but not surprised. "And the employee satisfaction scores?" "That's the real story," Richard said, sliding a tablet toward her. "Up 62%. Turnover down by 40%. Applications to open positions have tripled." Catherine studied the numbers, a deep satisfaction settling in her chest. These metrics mattered more to her now than stock prices or market share, though those had improved as well. "The board meeting this afternoon should be interesting," Richard remarked. Some of them were skeptical about this transformation. Hard to argue with these results, though. "It was never about just the numbers," Catherine reminded him. "It was about building something meaningful, something that reflects our values." Richard nodded, his own perspective having evolved alongside Catherine's. Speaking of values, the mentorship program has 30 new volunteers from senior staff. People are fighting to participate now. The mentorship initiative had been one of Catherine's first changes, a formal program pairing experienced employees with newcomers, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds. Catherine herself mentored 3 young women, giving them the guidance she wished she'd had early in her career. "That reminds me," Catherine said. "Alicia's presentation to the venture capital group is today. I promised I'd review her slides one last time." Alicia was one of Catherine's mentees, a brilliant product designer whose ideas had been overlooked in the previous culture. Now she was leading a major initiative and presenting to potential investors, something that would have been unthinkable in the old hierarchy. As Catherine settled at her desk, her phone buzzed with a text message from Denzel. "6 months since our coffee in New York. How's the transformation going?" They had kept in sporadic contact, brief messages of encouragement, book recommendations, occasional check-ins. His interest in her journey had never waned. Catherine typed back, "Better than I could have imagined. We're creating technology that actually helps people connect. The culture is unrecognizable from before. Thank you for helping me see what was possible." His response came quickly. "You did the hard part. Seeing the path is one thing. Walking it every day takes courage." Catherine smiled, tucking the phone away as her assistant announced Alicia's arrival. The young woman entered confidently, tablet in hand, a stark contrast to the nervous employee who once would have been terrified to present directly to the CEO. "I've refined the slides based on your feedback," Alicia began. "I've emphasized how our technology creates meaningful connections rather than just efficient ones." As they reviewed the presentation together, Catherine offered suggestions as a collaborator rather than dictating changes as an authority figure. When they finished, Alicia hesitated at the door. "Can I say something personal, Catherine?" "Of course. 6 months ago I was about to quit. The environment here was so toxic, so focused on competition rather than creation. Now," she gestured to the office beyond the glass walls, where teams collaborated in comfortable spaces, where laughter could occasionally be heard amid the productive buzz. "Now I can't imagine working anywhere else." After Alicia left, Catherine stood by the window, watching the activity below. The transformation hadn't been easy. Some executives had resisted the changes, clinging to the old cutthroat culture. A few had left, unable to adapt to a leadership style that valued emotional intelligence alongside technical brilliance. But most had embraced the evolution, finding their own work more fulfilling when fear was replaced with purpose. Catherine's phone chimed with a calendar reminder, time for her daily reflection hour. She gathered Denzel's book, now dog-eared and filled with her own highlights, and headed to the rooftop garden, another new addition to the headquarters. Settling onto a bench surrounded by native plants, Catherine opened her journal. She had begun this practice the day after returning from New York, documenting her journey of transformation, noting challenges and breakthroughs alike. Today's entry began, 6 months of change. What I've learned, true leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about creating spaces where everyone can contribute their best thinking. As she wrote, Catherine glanced at the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance, a reminder of connection and possibility. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, the lobby. "Ms. Winters, there's a Denzel Washington here to see you." Catherine froze, then smiled. "Send him up to the rooftop garden, please." Minutes later, the elevator opened and Denzel stepped out, taking in the transformed space with appreciative eyes. "Quite a change from what you described," he remarked, joining her on the bench. "In every way that matters," Catherine agreed. "I'm in town filming for a few weeks," Denzel explained. "Thought I'd see this transformation for myself." As they walked through the headquarters, Catherine introduced him to team members, watching their surprised faces shift from starstruck to genuinely engaged as Denzel asked thoughtful questions about their work. In the product demonstration area, they stopped before a display showing elderly users connecting with distant family members through their technology. The campaign concept that had once been dismissed as too emotional. "This is what success looks like," Catherine said quietly. Not market domination, but creating something that matters. Denzel nodded. The measure of a life well lived. As they completed the tour, returning to the rooftop garden, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude. That chance meeting on the plane, it changed everything. You were ready for change, Denzel corrected her. I just happened to be the messenger. They stood looking out at the city, the future stretching before them like the vast horizon. What's next for Catherine Winters? Denzel asked. She smiled, feeling the warm certainty of purpose in her chest. Continuing the journey, leading with compassion instead of fear, creating technology that brings people together instead of driving them apart. Catherine thought about how far she had come from that arrogant woman who had boarded a plane 6 months ago, so certain of her superiority, so blind to her own emptiness. The old Catherine would have considered this transformation a weakness, she admitted. Now I understand it's my greatest strength. As the sun began to set over San Francisco, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that her new beginning was only the first chapter of a much richer story, one measured not in acquisitions and accolades, but in lives touched and connections fostered. True strength, she had learned, wasn't found in dominance but in service, a lesson that had transformed not just her company but her very soul.